The great ones like Cecil B. DeMille. All those who knew Norma Desmond.
I'm ready, Mr. DeMille. Close up. Sunset Boulevard wasn't just a movie about Hollywood. It was a murder confession, screened in the heart of the Dream Factory itself. A film that opened with a corpse floating face down in a pool, narrated by a dead man, and featured real silent film stars playing versions of their own ghosts. But behind the Gothic mansion and the twisted romance, nothing was safe. The star nearly walked off set. The studio wanted to burn the film. And one scene, it was so disturbing that audiences fled the theater mid-screening. These are 20 weird facts about Sunset Boulevard. And the bonus, let's just say even the dead man had opinions about how he should look. Roll camera. This story starts in the dark. Billy Wilder didn't want to make another film, Noir. He'd already done Double Indemnity, a masterpiece of shadows and betrayal. But this time, he wanted something different, something personal. So he turned his lens on the one place he knew would never forgive him for it, Hollywood itself. The idea came from a real case, a forgotten silent film star living in isolation, clinging to delusions of a comeback that would never happen. Wilder saw the tragedy in it, but also the grotesque comedy, the horror of a town that devours its own. He brought in his writing partner, Charles Brackett, and together they crafted a story about Norma Desmond, a relic of silent cinema trapped in a decaying mansion, convinced she was still a star. But the studios didn't want it. They said it was too dark, too inside, too mean. Paramount executives warned him that Hollywood didn't want to see itself dissected on screen. Wilder didn't care. He told them the truth was always uncomfortable, and if they wanted safe, they hired the wrong director. So he pushed forward, knowing the town would hate him for it. And he was right. But by the time they realized what he'd done, the cameras were already rolling. And Sunset Boulevard, it wasn't just a movie, it was a reckoning. The opening scene was supposed to be impossible. A dead man floating in a pool telling you how he got there. The studio called it absurd. Test audiences said it wouldn't work. But Billy Wilder refused to change it. The problem was how to film it. They needed the camera underwater, looking up at William Holden's corpse drifting on the surface. But in 1949, underwater cinematography was primitive, expensive, and dangerous. So the crew built a custom rig, placed a mirror at the bottom of the pool at an angle, and shot the reflection from above. It was a trick, but it worked. On the day of the shoot, Holden floated face down in the cold water for hours, holding his breath between takes, his skin turning blue. The crew stood around the edge, watching in silence. It felt wrong, morbid, like they were filming an actual drowning. But when Wilder saw the rushes, he knew they had it. That opening image, a man dead in the water, narrating his own demise, became one of the most iconic shots in cinema history. It told the audience immediately that nothing about this film would be conventional, and it set the tone for everything that followed. Dark, twisted, and disturbingly beautiful. Hollywood had never seen anything like it, and once that corpse started talking, there was no turning back.
The poor dope. Yo.
Norma Desmond was supposed to be played by Mae West. Wilder wanted someone with star power, someone the audience would recognize as a faded icon. West had the name, the presence, the ego. She read the script, loved the dialogue, saw the tragedy in the character. But then she stopped. She looked up at Wilder and said, "I am not faded." And just like that, she was out. Wilder tried others. He approached Mary Pickford, America's sweetheart from the silent era. She refused, saying the role was too dark, too unflattering. He went to Pola Negri, another silent legend. She turned it down for the same reason. No one wanted to play a woman losing her mind, clinging to a past that no longer existed. Then Wilder thought of Gloria Swanson. She'd been one of the biggest stars of the silent era, but her career had faded with the arrival of sound. She was living quietly, mostly forgotten by Hollywood. Wilder called her and pitched the role. Swanson didn't hesitate. She knew exactly what Norma Desmond was. She'd lived pieces of it, not the madness, but the erasure, the feeling of being discarded by an industry that once worshipped her. She said yes immediately, and when she stepped onto the set, it wasn't just acting, it was exorcism. She poured every ounce of rage, grief, and forgotten glory into Norma, and Hollywood had no choice but to watch.
Gloria Swanson, one of the great personalities of this generation.
William Holden wasn't Wilder's first choice. The role of Joe Gillis, the cynical screenwriter who stumbles into Norma's world, was originally offered to Montgomery Clift. He was young, handsome, perfect for the part of a man selling his soul for survival. Clift read the script, loved it, and agreed to do it. But then something changed. As filming approached, Clift started having doubts. He confided in friends that the character felt too close to reality, too much like the darker side of Hollywood he was already navigating. But the real problem was more personal. Clift was secretly involved in a relationship with singer Libby Holman, a woman significantly older than him. The parallels to the plot, a younger man entangled with an older woman, made him deeply uncomfortable. He pulled out just weeks before production started. Wilder panicked. He needed someone fast, someone who could carry the film without overpowering Swanson. He turned to William Holden, a mid-tier actor who'd been struggling to break through. Holden wasn't Clift's equal in star power, but he had something else. He had weariness. He looked tired, defeated, like a man who'd already compromised too much. And that's exactly what Joe Gillis needed to be. Holden signed on, walked into the role, and delivered the performance that would define his career. Sometimes the backup plan is the only plan that works.
Never occurred to you that I may have a life of my own, that there may be...
The mansion wasn't just a set. It was real. Billy Wilder found it on Sunset Boulevard, a sprawling estate that had once belonged to a silent film star. The place was enormous, gothic, crumbling in just the right way. It was perfect for Norma Desmond's world, a monument to forgotten grandeur. But when Wilder approached the owner, he got a strange response. The current resident was Jean-Paul Getty, one of the wealthiest men in the world. He agreed to let them film there, but only on one condition. They had to work around his schedule. He was still living in the house during production. So, the crew would show up, set up lights, move furniture, film scenes of madness and decay, and then pack everything up before Getty came home for dinner. It was surreal. By day, the house belonged to Norma Desmond. By night, it was a billionaire's private residence. The contrast felt like its own kind of horror. Wilder later said the mansion had a presence, something heavy, like it remembered the people who'd once lived and died inside its walls. You could feel it in the shadows, in the empty rooms, in the staircase that Norma would descend for her final, tragic close-up. It wasn't just a location, it was a character, silent and watching. And when the cameras finally left, the house stayed behind, waiting for the next forgotten star to wander through its doors. Erich von Stroheim didn't just play Norma's butler, he was living his own version of the story. Von Stroheim had been one of the greatest directors of the silent era, a visionary who made sprawling operatic films that pushed boundaries and budgets to the breaking point. But when sound arrived, Hollywood turned on him. Studios called him difficult, extravagant, impossible to control. His career collapsed, and by the 1940s, he was mostly forgotten. When Billy Wilder offered him the role of Max von Mayerling, Norma's devoted servant and former director, von Stroheim hesitated. He saw what it was. The character was a man who'd once been powerful, now reduced to serving the star he'd created, enabling her delusions, protecting her from reality. It was too close, but he took the role anyway, perhaps because he understood it better than anyone else could. On set, he barely spoke between takes. He moved through the scenes with quiet dignity, his face a mask of controlled grief. In one pivotal moment, Max reveals that he writes all of Norma's fan letters himself, keeping her fantasy alive. When von Stroheim delivered that confession, the crew fell silent. It wasn't just acting, it was recognition. He wasn't playing a character, he was playing himself, a man haunted by the glory he'd lost. And in that performance, von Stroheim found something rare in Hollywood: truth.
The great ones like Cecil B. DeMille. All those who...
The film within a film wasn't random. When Norma screens one of her old silent movies for Joe, Billy Wilder didn't use a fake clip. He used actual footage from one of Gloria Swanson's real films, Queen Kelly, directed by none other than Erich von Stroheim in 1929. The scene was perfect, hauntingly beautiful, and it collapsed the line between fiction and reality. Because in that moment, Norma Desmond watching herself on screen was Gloria Swanson watching herself, and Max standing in the shadows was von Stroheim watching his own work, unfinished and abandoned. Queen Kelly had been a disaster. The production spiraled out of control, and it was never properly completed or released in the United States. Swanson had invested her own money into it and lost everything. Decades later, here she was, watching that footage again, but this time in a film about failure and delusion. Wilder didn't explain the connection to audiences. He didn't have to. For those who knew, it was devastating. For those who didn't, it still felt wrong, like witnessing something too intimate. Swanson later said that watching that scene in Sunset Boulevard was harder than filming it, because it wasn't just Norma grieving her lost fame, it was Gloria grieving hers. And von Stroheim, standing behind her in the projection room, wasn't just playing a butler. He was standing in the ruins of his own career, watching the past flicker and fade on a screen that no longer cared. Cecil B. DeMille didn't want to be in the movie. Wilder needed a real Hollywood director to appear as himself, someone legendary enough to make Norma's delusion feel almost plausible. DeMille was the obvious choice. He'd directed Swanson in silent films, and he was still one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. But when Wilder approached him, DeMille refused. He didn't want to participate in what he saw as a cruel satire of the industry. He thought the film was too dark, too cynical. Wilder didn't give up. He rewrote the scene, softened DeMille's role, made him more sympathetic. He pitched it again, this time appealing to DeMille's ego and his genuine affection for Swanson. Finally, DeMille agreed, but only for one day of shooting. No rehearsals, no retakes, just one take per setup. When the day came, Swanson walked onto the Paramount lot, onto the set where DeMille was filming Samson and Delilah, and something shifted. She wasn't acting anymore. She was genuinely emotional, returning to a place that had once been her kingdom. DeMille treated her with real tenderness, calling her young fella, his old nickname for her. The cameras captured it all, and in that brief scene, you can see the real history between them, the real loss. It's one of the most honest moments in the film, not because it was scripted, but because for a few minutes, Norma and Gloria became the same person. The final scene nearly destroyed Gloria Swanson. Norma's descent down the staircase, lost in madness, believing the cameras are there for her triumphant return. All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up. It's one of the most famous moments in cinema, but filming it broke something in Swanson. Wilder shot it over and over, dozens of takes, pushing her further each time. He wanted her eyes vacant, her face transformed, her movements dreamlike. Swanson gave him everything. She descended those stairs again and again, slipping deeper into Norma's delusion with each take. But by the end of the day, she was shaking. She told Wilder she couldn't do it anymore, that she'd gone too far into the character and didn't know how to come back. Wilder called a wrap. The crew cleared out. Swanson sat alone on the stairs in the empty mansion, still in costume, still in Norma's world. It took her nearly an hour to pull herself out. She later said that scene haunted her for years, that she'd see it in her sleep, feel Norma's madness creeping into her own thoughts, because the line between them had been so thin. Both women abandoned by Hollywood, both fighting to be seen again. The difference was, Swanson had a way out, Norma didn't. And for those few hours of filming, Swanson lived in a place where escape wasn't possible. That's what Wilder captured. Not acting, but something closer to possession. When Sunset Boulevard premiered in Hollywood, the reaction was brutal. This wasn't a regular screening. This was the industry watching itself get torn apart. Studio executives sat in silence. Actors shifted uncomfortably. By the time the lights came up, Barbara Stanwyck was openly weeping. Louis B. Mayer, the head of MGM, was furious. He found Billy Wilder in the lobby and screamed at him, calling the film a disgrace, accusing him of biting the hand that fed him. Wilder didn't apologize. He just stared back and said, "Go fuck yourself." The room went silent. Mayer stormed out, and half the audience followed, but the other half stayed. They knew they'd just witnessed something dangerous, something true. The film wasn't just entertainment, it was exposure. It held up a mirror to Hollywood's vanity, cruelty, and disposability, and the town hated seeing its own reflection. In the days that followed, Wilder received angry calls, cold shoulders at restaurants, whispers that he'd committed career suicide, but he didn't care. Because outside of Hollywood, audiences loved it. Critics called it a masterpiece. And slowly, even the industry had to admit that Wilder had done something extraordinary. He'd made a film about Hollywood that Hollywood couldn't kill, no matter how much it wanted to. Sunset Boulevard survived its own premiere, and that was the ultimate revenge. The script was written in secret. Billy Wilder and Charles Brackett knew that if word got out about what they were writing, the studios would shut them down before they typed "fade in." So they worked in private, meeting in hotel rooms, Wilder's house, anywhere away from Paramount's eyes. They told no one the plot, not their agents, not their friends. The secrecy was so tight that when they finally turned. In the finished screenplay, executives read it in shock. Some called it brilliant, others called it commercial suicide. But by then, it was too late to stop. Wilder had already started assembling his cast, and Paramount had too much invested to pull out. The secrecy paid off in another way too. Because no one knew what the film was about, there were no leaks, no gossip columnists writing hit pieces, no competing projects trying to beat them to the punch. Sunset Boulevard arrived in theaters as a complete surprise, a film no one saw coming. And that element of shock, that feeling of witnessing something forbidden, became part of its power. Audiences walked in expecting a standard Hollywood drama and walked out shaken. They had been ambushed by the truth. Wilder later admitted that if he'd pitched the idea openly, it never would have been made. The only way to make a film about Hollywood's darkness was to make it in the dark. And by the time the lights came on, it was too late for anyone to look away. William Holden's narration almost got cut entirely. After the first test screening, some executives argued that the voiceover was too cynical, too detached. They wanted the story told straight, without Joe's bitter commentary. Wilder refused. He knew the narration was essential, not just for exposition, but for tone. Joe Gillis had to sound like a man who'd already lost, who was watching his own life unravel with dark amusement. But there was another problem. In early drafts, the narration continued even after Joe's death, with his voice speaking from beyond the grave. Some versions had Joe's corpse in the morgue, talking to other dead bodies, all of them screenwriters who'd sold out and paid the price. Wilder actually filmed this morgue sequence. Dead bodies on slabs, wrapped in sheets, having a conversation about how they died. Test audiences hated it. They found it too macabre, too surreal, too much. People laughed in the wrong places. Some walked out. Wilder was devastated, but he knew they were right. The morgue scene broke the spell. So he cut it entirely and restructured the narration to end with Joe floating in the pool. It was a painful decision, losing footage he'd fought to shoot. But it saved the film. Sometimes the best choice is knowing what to leave on the cutting room floor. And in this case, the dead really were better left silent. Gloria Swanson's costumes weren't designed for the film. They were pulled from her own closet. Costume designer Edith Head wanted to create something over the top, theatrical. But when she met with Swanson, she realized the actress already had everything they needed. Swanson had kept dozens of gowns, turbans, jewels, and exotic pieces from her silent film days. Outfits that had once been the height of glamour, but now looked bizarre, outdated, trapped in time. Head was stunned. These weren't costumes, they were artifacts. So instead of creating new pieces, Head selected the most dramatic, the most excessive, the pieces that screamed of a woman who couldn't let go. That leopard print coat, the turbans, the massive jewelry, all of it real, all of it from Swanson's past. When she wore them on camera, she wasn't dressing up as Norma Desmond. She was wearing her own ghost. Every outfit carried history, weight, the scent of mothballs and memory. Hollywood had moved on without her, and here she was, draped in the remnants of her former glory. Edith Head won an Oscar for the costumes, but the real designer was time itself. The pool was freezing. The iconic opening shot, with Holden floating face down, required him to stay in the water for hours at a time. But the mansion's pool hadn't been used in years, and when they filled it for filming, there was no heating system. The water was ice cold, and Holden had to endure take after take, his body going numb, his lips turning blue. Between setups, crew members would pull him out, wrap him in blankets, try to warm him up, then send him back in. He never complained. He knew what the shot required, but years later, he admitted those hours in the pool were some of the most miserable of his career. The cold seeped into his bones, and for days after, he couldn't get warm. There's a strange irony in that, because Joe Gillis spends the entire film feeling dead, going through the motions, trapped in a life he can't escape. And Holden had to literally embody that cold, that numbness, that sense of being submerged in something you can't get out of. The discomfort wasn't just physical, it was metaphorical. And when you watch that opening, knowing what Holden endured, it adds another layer. He's not just playing a dead man, he's feeling what it's like to be one, suspended in darkness, floating in cold silence, waiting for someone to finally pull him out. There's a chimpanzee funeral in the film, and it wasn't scripted. During production, one of the studio's trained chimps died, and the animal handlers held a small funeral service on the Paramount lot. Billy Wilder happened to walk by and saw the absurdity of it. Grown men in suits, standing around a tiny coffin, taking it completely seriously. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, and immediately he knew it belonged in Sunset Boulevard. He rewrote a scene to include it, having Norma host an elaborate funeral for her dead pet chimpanzee, complete with a child-sized coffin and a burial in the backyard. It was grotesque, darkly funny, and perfectly captured Norma's delusional world. A woman who treats animals like people and people like props. When they filmed it, Swanson played it with complete sincerity, mourning the chimp as if she'd lost a child. The crew didn't know whether to laugh or look away. It was uncomfortable, surreal, one of the strangest moments in the film. But it worked, because in Norma's mansion, nothing is normal. Life and death blur together. The past and present collapse. And a chimpanzee gets a funeral while a man drowns in a pool and nobody notices. Wilder later said, that scene, more than any other, showed how far gone Norma was. She could mourn an animal, but couldn't see the human tragedy unfolding right in front of her. That's not just madness, that's Hollywood. Sunset Boulevard was supposed to be a musical. In the 1990s, Andrew Lloyd Webber adapted the film for the stage with full orchestration and theatrical grandeur. It premiered in London in 1993 with Patti LuPone as Norma Desmond. Massive hit. But then came the Broadway transfer and everything fell apart. Glenn Close was cast for the American production, and LuPone sued for breach of contract. Two actresses fighting over who got to play a fading star, fighting to stay relevant. The irony was almost too perfect. Close won, and the show opened on Broadway in 1994. It ran for years, but critics said the musical turned Wilder's subtle psychological horror into something overblown. Songs like With One Look became iconic, but they flattened Norma into a diva caricature instead of the tragic figure Swanson created. Wilder hated it. He refused to see the show, saying his film didn't need songs. It was already operatic. Adding music just made the subtext text, but audiences loved it anyway, because sometimes people want the pain at full volume, even if it missed the point entirely. The film was banned in several countries, not because of violence or sex, but because it was too honest. Some foreign censors said the depiction of Hollywood was damaging to American prestige abroad. Others said Norma's mental breakdown was too disturbing, too uncomfortable. In some territories, entire scenes were cut. The chimpanzee funeral, the final staircase descent, even portions of Joe's narration, all removed because they were deemed too dark for audiences. Paramount fought back, but in many places the cuts stayed. What played in Paris wasn't the same film that played in New York, and in some countries, it didn't play at all. But the controversy only added to the film's mystique. It became the movie Hollywood didn't want you to see, the one that told secrets the industry tried to bury. When it finally played uncensored in more liberal markets, audiences packed theaters, hungry for the forbidden version. Wilder later joked that the bans were the best publicity he could have asked for. Nothing sells tickets like telling people they're not allowed to watch. And Sunset Boulevard thrived on that rebellious energy. It was a film about the darkness lurking behind the glamour, and the fact that some places tried to hide that darkness only proved the movie's point. Hollywood wasn't just cruel, it was afraid. Afraid of the truth, afraid of the mirror, afraid of what it had become. Norma's famous line, "I am big, it's the pictures that got small," wasn't in the original script. Gloria Swanson improvised it during rehearsal, and Billy Wilder loved it so much he kept it. The scripted version was longer, more defensive, but Swanson's delivery cut through all of that. She made it sharp, defiant, delusional. With just 9 words, she captured everything about Norma's refusal to accept reality. She wasn't a relic. The world had simply shrunk around her. Wilder called it one of the greatest line readings in cinema, but Swanson said it came from a real place. She'd heard variations of that sentiment from actual silent stars, actors who genuinely believed the talkies had ruined movies. That sound had made everything smaller, cheaper, less magical. They weren't entirely wrong. Silent films had a grandeur, a visual poetry that early sound films often lacked, but they couldn't accept that the world had moved on. And Swanson understood that stubbornness, that pride. So when she delivered the line, she wasn't mocking them, she was channeling them. And it became one of the most quoted lines in movie history, not because it was funny, but because it was painfully true. Norma wasn't wrong about Hollywood getting smaller. She was just wrong about her place in it. The pictures didn't shrink, she did. And that delusion, delivered with such fierce conviction, is what made the line unforgettable. William Holden almost drowned for real during the final pool scene. After Joe is shot, his body falls into the water, and the camera had to capture it from multiple angles. For one shot, Holden had to sink beneath the surface and stay submerged while cameras adjusted. But something went wrong. His costume tangled in an underwater camera rig, and he couldn't surface. He thrashed, signaling frantically, but the crew thought he was acting. For several terrifying seconds, no one realized he was in actual danger. Finally, a camera assistant dove in and cut him free. He came up gasping, furious. Production shut down for the day. Holden refused to go back without safety divers on standby. He later said that moment changed everything. Before, it was just a dark Hollywood satire. After, it felt cursed, like Joe Gillis dying in a pool was bleeding into reality. And in a twisted way, it made his performance better. Every time Joe talked about being trapped, about sinking into something he couldn't escape, Holden knew exactly what that felt like. The fear was real. The drowning was real. And it's there in every frame. Billy Wilder kept a photograph from the set on his desk for the rest of his life. It wasn't a glamorous shot or a behind-the-scenes moment with the stars. It was a picture of the mansion's staircase, empty, lit from above, shadows pooling at the bottom. No actors, no crew, just the stairs. He never explained why he kept it, but people close to him said it reminded him of what the film was really about. That staircase was where Norma made her final descent, where she lost herself completely, where delusion became the only reality she had left. And for Wilder, that image represented something larger, the slow, inevitable fall that Hollywood inflicts on everyone who stays too long. The way the town builds you up, only to watch you crumble. He'd seen it happen to directors, actors, writers, people who had once been untouchable, and he knew that no one was immune, not even him. So he kept that photograph as a reminder, a warning, that in Hollywood, everyone eventually reaches the top of the staircase, and when they do, there's only one direction left to go. Down, into the shadows, into the cameras, into a close-up that never ends. Sunset Boulevard wasn't just a film about one woman's madness. It was about an entire industry's, and Wilder never let himself forget it. When William Holden's character floats dead in the pool, his eyes are open, staring up at nothing. It's an unsettling image, but it almost looked completely different. During makeup tests, the team tried closing his eyes, thinking it would be more peaceful, more respectful. But Wilder rejected it immediately. He wanted Joe's eyes open because dead men in Sunset Boulevard don't get peace. They don't get to look away. Joe had spent the entire film watching Hollywood destroy itself, and even in death, he couldn't stop looking. The open eyes became one of the most haunting details of the shot. Holden said keeping his eyes open underwater was nearly impossible. The chlorine burned. His natural instinct was to blink, but take after take, he forced them open, staring up through the rippling water at the distorted sky above. That commitment, that willingness to endure discomfort for the perfect image, it's very Hollywood. Suffering for the shot. And maybe that's the real lesson of Sunset Boulevard. Everyone's willing to drown if it means the camera keeps rolling. Sunset Boulevard didn't just expose Hollywood. It became part of Hollywood's DNA. A film so dark, so honest, so unforgiving, that 50 years later, it still cuts deep. It's a ghost story where everyone's already dead. They just haven't stopped performing yet. If this one got under your skin, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which fact shocked you most. Thanks for watching. And remember, in this town, we're always ready for our close-up, whether the cameras are rolling or not.